15 years ago when Thor premiered, it faced that unique challenge because, like, the MCU was still kind of like in its infancy stage. Like, it was just starting. Like, we had only had Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, and Iron Man 2, and then Thor. So we went from the mechanical engineering genius to the raging Hulk monster to now mystical warriors. It was just such a huge jump from one to the other. And a Norse god wielding magical hammer would have fit alongside those worlds of Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. But 15 years later, I think Thor remains one of the MCU's most like important foundational films. It may not be one of the flashier entries. It successfully did introduce the cosmic side of the MCU really early, and it would become pretty much essential to the MCU later on. So, let's think about that for a second, right? Like, we get Asgard, we get a bunch of the other Asgardians, we get to see some pretty cool things like Easter eggs. We get the destroyer armor, even though it gets destroyed in this movie. So, we get it for like one good battle and we don't see it again. But we get instances that the cosmos are vast. We see what is it, Jotunheim? That's like the frozen section in Norse mythology, right? Jotunheim. So like we saw a lot of different things, which we see the frost giants again. We haven't really seen them since. But like what was like something I think Chris Hemsworth literally was born to play Thor. I remember when it was coming out and they announced him, I had no idea who he was. I don't think I'd seen a single movie with him except for Star Trek, and I still didn't remember who he was. But I saw him and I said, "Yep, that guy looks like Thor. He looks, he looks like he could be Thor." I remember, the big thing was Triple H should be Thor, and I was like, Triple H is an ass actor. I don't want to watch this if Triple H is going to be a terrible actor. But then it got the guy who, in my opinion, is literally born to be Thor. Like, you look at him and say, "Yeah, that's Thor," you know. Whew. And he was probably the biggest success of the movie because he was an unknown person, and he came out and he did that. And then by the time of the Avengers dropped that next year, Chris Hemsworth was a big star. But it's hard to imagine like before, like Thor and Hemsworth was like it was unknown to mainstream audiences. He just had that charisma. The physicality was absolutely there. The dude was built like a truck. Actually, the craziest part was he actually had to lose muscle because he was too big for the suit. So what we see in the shot where he's shirtless, that was after he lost muscle. So that part is a little bit insane. And I think Chris Hemsworth really did a good job for early acting in his career. He really did a good job of capturing the arrogance, the recklessness, and the immature of Thor. He did a really good job of portraying that. And the film gave him a good, genuine character arc. The humility, the sacrifice. And by the end, he is more like a hero, and he actually earned the title of hero, and he earned his powers of Thor back. Now, I do say Tom Hiddleston, he probably blew up more than Chris Hemsworth did. Like, Tom Hiddleston really blew up after Thor. I mean, Loki was the first really good MCU villain, so that makes sense. But he did. It's one of the greatest casting decisions, and it's kind of funny to think that Tom Hiddleston auditioned for Thor. I think that's like legitimately kind of insane. But he wasn't simple. They actually gave him a tragic history with the whole hiding the identity that he's, a frost giant, which is accurate to the comics. I think he's Ymir's son instead of Laufey's son, but whatever. And he had that jealousy, that sense of like, I could do it just as good as Thor could, but I'm still gonna be his brother at the end of the day. Like that whole dynamic was just there. And also we see him use his magic a lot more in this, which annoyed me that later on they kind of forget the cool magic stuff every now and then. But a lot of good MCU stories would be like built off of the foundation set here in Thor. Like everything with Loki, everything with Thor and Loki, everything with Thor fighting to the cosmos later, it all started here. And like I do say having Kenneth Branagh direct Thor was kind of the chef's kiss, right? Because he was a Shakespearean style director, and having something like Thor with Norse mythology was just perfect for him. Which is why I was kind of upset he didn't do the other two. Like, what would the other two have been like if Kenneth Branagh directed all of the Thor movies? But it does have that royal family crisis that you see in a lot of those Shakespearean family dramas. And that's a lot more of the emotional weight of the film is like the drama between Thor, Loki, and Odin is the emotional core, the rough exterior that kind of sharpens the blade for the final cut. But even today, like there's some of the strongest aspects of the movie 15 years later. I love the scene when Loki literally just loses it and breaks down in front of Odin. Like, why didn't you tell me this? I thought Tom Hiddleston was phenomenal in that scene. I thought that was the best acted scene in the movie. Outside of Anthony Hopkins casting Thor, I thought that scene was also fantastic. And Anthony Hopkins, being Anthony Hopkins, he always brings the pain. Now, going into a little side note, I do think Asgard looks really good. I think they put a lot of the budget into making Asgard look good because it does. But the golden places, the palaces, the Bifrost, and it all just looks good. Like I was like, damn, this looks like Asgard. Like this is exactly how I imagined Asgard would look in real life. And we do see Asgard in later MCU films, but it doesn't have that bright vibrantness like it does here. I love the fact that there's that beautiful bright color in Thor that we don't really see in the later Thor films. Well, actually, we get it back in Ragnarok, but we don't really see Asgard. So do what y'all want with that. It is a little interesting that the when it's on Asgard, it's like this serious warrior Shakespearean drama, but when it goes to Earth, it feels like this fish out of water comedy that just is a little bit jarring because like in a Thor movie the last thing you'd want to do is piss yourself laughing, but the humor is there and it's just kind of fan. I remember seeing it there. I was like, I wasn't expecting the Thor movie to be so funny, but it is, and it has Mabu and it has Natalie Portman in it, and it's that and the third. But it does slow the pacing a lot. Like when Thor lands on Earth and everything's going on, it slows the pacing relatively noticeably. And yeah, it just felt really just thrown in for something, for some reason. I will go into a controversial part of this. I know a lot of people say that Jane Foster felt underdeveloped. I wasn't really going into this movie hoping Jane Foster would become some developed human being. I was just like, she's here because she's Jane Foster. When was Jane Foster ever really developed in the comics? You know what I mean? Like they did pretty much what the comics do with Jane Foster. She's there, she's good. But I know in the original comics, Jane Foster's like a nurse or something like that. And here she's like an astrophysicist or some shit. And I'm like, well, that's already kind of a step up from what we get from her in the comics originally in the 60s. So, and their romance is legitimately nice. It does progress a little quickly, but I do like the chemistry between Portman and Hemsworth. I thought that was a very good, like, chemistry dynamic between the two actors. I think if there was more time to flesh them out, maybe it could have been one of the better MCU romances, but unfortunately, it just kind of isn't. And even later films kind of show that. But the people will say like the action is limited, but the Frost Giant battle is fire as hell. The Shield compound is cool, and I really like the final fight with Loki. I said when I was younger, I thought it was very clever when he takes the hammer and just sets it on top of Loki and walks away. It's like, yep, this is clever. This is by far one of the best uses of the hammer's enchanted, like cursed, because Loki wasn't worthy, so he couldn't move it, so he was just stuck. And I thought, wow, that is damn good. So let's be honest. In Thor, the more memorable parts is the family drama and Loki's reveal and Tom Hiddleston's performance, and those are probably the more memorable parts of the Shakespearean MCU film that introduced us to the cosmics, but also gave us that family drama that we were looking for. But looking back, it was a huge risk. It really was. Like, it had to pretty much convince people that magic and the cosmic realms could exist alongside, say, eventually Captain America and Iron Man. It thought like it was a hard, It was a hard sell, but it paid off. And it's actually kind of hard to imagine Marvel reaching those movies like Infinity War and Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange without the success of Thor. I feel like Thor is kind of the reason we were able to get the type of films we got later on down the line. And it does feel so different from later Thor movies. Like it just feels so different. Like when you're looking at Thor 1 and look at Thor Love and Thunder, God rest my soul for saying it. But look at that movie and look at Thor 1. It's a completely different change. Thor's character, the looks, the power, it's all a different situation. And I didn't think that the Thor we got here and the Thor we get by Endgame would be the same person, but they are. And I just never expected that we would get that route to go. But I'd say Thor is an MCU film, about a 7.5, somewhere around there. Like it's good, like I like Thor 1, but there's so many other MCU movies that are just above it and beyond it. So therefore, there it is. I say 15 years later, I would say Thor is one of the most underrated like origin films, and it may lack the spectacle of a lot of the recent MCU movies, but strong performances with the family drama, it continues to kind of hold up pretty well. And it introduced Thor and Loki, and they're pretty much cornerstones for the MCU for the next 8 to 10 years after this point. So I'm gonna sign off. Let me know how you feel below. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.